Hey, welcome everyone to this third weekly version of the Conversation of Work Symposium on Human-Computer Interaction for Work. Please note that this session is recording. We're working on a code of conduct. I don't think that's online yet, but we want to act professionally while we're here, but also have a fun time. Today we have Ben Cowan from the University College Dublin as a guest. And before I introduce Ben more properly, I will make a couple more general remarks. In this Work series, we have weekly conversations with experts on various aspects of the future of work. The general chairs are Andrew Kuhn and Orit Shear, and the conversations are hosted by the technical program chairs, which are Anna Cox, Nia Kumar, Helena Mentis, and myself. And Anna Cox is here today to help me with the questions. We have a fantastic team of volunteers that create these series and help us with all kinds of aspects of the organization. And you can find more about them on the Work sessions website, which is www.kaiwork.org. The format of each session is that we have a conversation with a guest, which is today, Ben. And the conversation goes for about 30 minutes recorded, and that includes questions from you as an audience. After that, there will be an unrecorded part where we can have more social interaction that you would normally also have after you had a talk at a conference. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Anna Cox will be monitoring them, and we'll make sure that the floor is handed over to you to ask the question. With that, let's welcome Ben. We're honored to have Dr. Ben Cowan with us today. Ben is an associate professor at UC Dublin School of Information and Communication Studies. His research is at the intersection of psychology, HCI, and communication systems. And you investigate how design impacts aspects of user behavior in social, collaborative, and communicative technology interactions. More specifically on how theory and methods from psychological science can be applied to understand and design speech and language technologies. Dr. Cowan is the co-founder and co-director of the HCI at UCD Group. He's a researcher within the ADAPT Center. And Ben is also co-founder, organizer, and steering committee member of the CUI conference, Conversational User Interfaces. And in the time when there were physical conferences, you couldn't pass Ben without getting a sticker from CUI for your badge. He's the poster boy presenter, apart from all these formal titles. He's doing that very well. Welcome, Ben. To start off, let's talk about those conversational user interfaces. So what is it exactly, or maybe it's easier to say, what is it not, right? Is it text? Is it speech? Is it intelligence? What sort of what are we talking about?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. So when we formed the conference, when we formed kind of the CUI community, I suppose the idea was to have a sense of these kind of interfaces that you interact with, mostly using language. So it can be text as well as speech, and the sense of whether it's a kind of mostly a two-way dialogue. So, but it can also be multi-party, and so it's really interactions. The way we see it is interactions that you kind of use language to interact with the user, and also sometimes have some kind of social interaction between the user and the machine. It doesn't have to be; it can always be task-oriented. So the main thing there is the language element, whether that be text or speech. Great question about whether they're intelligent, though. So I think there's a lot of under the hood with kind of text and speech-based interfaces, and a lot of machine learning that goes on there in terms of recognition, but also the dialogue management and the generation of synthesis. But there really is a question whether the intelligence that they're designed to show is actually truly realistic in terms of the actual intelligence they have. And I'd argue that that's probably not the case. Most of the time, these types of CUI interfaces focus very much on task-oriented interactions. So like, getting the weather for you, or kind of responding in a canned way to customer service-based responses, or populating a response with, with some predicted words for things. So intelligence, probably not. Not as intelligent as they'd like to be perceived to be, but using language, definitely.
Right, so it's even at the level where we don't think that the the intelligent agent is intelligent, right? So it's not like a Turing test where you think, oh, I'm really talking with a person, but it's a CUI interface secretly. It's not that secret, is it?
No, I mean, this is the thing. It's not. I think there's a lot of the desire in terms of the design of, especially in terms of speech interfaces, but also kind of like text chatbots, is to really kind of get a sense, not necessarily that they're fooling individuals, but that there's a sense of that you can use the thing we're all familiar with when it comes to language interaction, which is dialogue, or which is interaction with another through language. And so there's this sense of trying to not fool people into what that it's that, but to kind of get people feel comfortable about that kind of way of interacting. And really, I think sometimes the design decisions that are made in those situations are make people feel that these things are probably more intelligent than they actually are. And there's a lot of work on kind of elements of appropriateness, whether certain design choices, like whether the voice is human-like, is really appropriate, because it makes people feel that these systems might be a bit more intelligent. I think Luger and Selin kind of call it kind of the there's kind of a gap of expectation, and a kind of mismatch in expectations. And so I think that's where the intelligence aspect falls down. And I suppose the HCI community's got a lot of work that we can do in that regard.
Yeah, and in the title for today, you mentioned that these agents need to be proactive. So why do we need that proactive bit, and what makes an agent sort of appropriate proactive?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of the work that we've been doing recently is that at the moment there's a sense of like these, especially in terms of kind of voice agents, so voice user interfaces, which is really what we kind of specialize in our lab in Dublin. All the great people who work with me at UCD, and what we kind of looked at the moment in terms of proactive aspects of agents is, well, a lot of the time these agents are sitting idle or are sitting on your kind of desk or in your home, and they could kind of maybe support you in different ways and situations, and also in different contexts. So whether that's, say, for instance, in the car, or whether that's say helping you when you're putting together an assignment or putting together a paper or whatever. So we had this kind of idea of potentially saying, well, how can these agents become kind of proactive in a way that they engage in not just one turn adjacency pair dialogue? So they're not just, it's not me just requesting, can you give me the weather? And then they give me the information, and that's the dialogue finished. There may be some element of going, oh, actually, and then the device might kind of ask you a question, or might engage in those particular ways. So that's what we kind of think of as proactive, so that the agent is giving a sense of that they may engage you in more dialogue, or they might just be trying to help you in further ways. And like, of course, that's not going to be appropriate in all situations. So, there's a lot to consider there in terms of the context where that's appropriate, how to design that in terms of being sensitive to that context. So Justin Edwards, who's on the call just now, is doing a lot of really interesting work about how we, how the system should phrase the way it might even interrupt people whenever they're doing busy tasks, and how what the timing of that's like. And that's a really difficult problem. I mean, as you know, Chris, in terms of how that works with breakpoints and things like that, it's a really big problem to focus on. But I think that these agents, there's a potential piece of work that we could do to make these away from kind of static, kind of user-led, to being kind of more kind of cooperative interfaces in the future. Now, we're nowhere near that at the moment, like in terms of we're still very user-led in the way that's there. But I think that there's some interesting work to be done about how these agents might be able to kind of interrupt and help us in particular tasks. But again, it has to be sensitive to the context and sensitive to the user task that's being done.
So where lies the problem there? So the way you describe it, it almost sounds like the language itself might not be the issue, but it's really that understanding of the tasks that people are doing, or the context in which they are working. So is that sort of the part that of the puzzle that we need to understand, the context, or is it also how that then changes the language? Or is it more of sort of initially even understanding, like understanding that you have a calendar and knowing what's in the calendar and what the implications are. Such short. So 20 minutes ago, before this conversation started, that my calendar lets me know, hey Chris, you better go
Yeah.
to your room and prepare for that talk with Ben. Here are the talking points.
Right.
Should the calendar anticipate that type of stuff? Is that the crucial part of the CUI interface, or is it the language?
Yeah, I think it's hard to kind of I would say it's all of it really. I mean, so it's kind of hard to separate from and it's hard to kind of understate the importance of understanding the type of task that is going to be that this agent is going to be proactive with. So as well as understanding what kind of contextual information is required. So as you said before, the idea of kind of calendars, the idea of what information needs to be inputted into one of these agents for it to be useful in that regard. So I think that there's a piece of work there that needs to be focused on, and also this idea of the context that's appropriate in. So say for instance, it may be appropriate in the car when you're trying to conduct work, but it may not be appropriate if you're in an office, like a shared office environment with an agent like piping up in front of everybody else. So there's that piece there, but I would say this because I really like working on language. There's a sense of that language can do so much when communicating information through its channels. So not only through words, but through the prosody, through the timbre, the tone that's utilized with the speech interface. So say for instance, if you've got a notification, an agent wants to tell you something incredibly urgently, there may be some elements that you can do through prosody that maybe like the message is very short, but you know that it's really, really urgent. So there's a lot of design work that can be done about those types of interruptions and notifications around the language and the language output in particular whenever doing that. But that's just one part of the puzzle. But I would definitely say that, that's the bit that interests me an awful lot because of having a kind of a mild obsession with language and dialogue. But and that's my cross to bear. But I'd say that is something to consider too.
Yeah. And then you recently did some work into seeing these agents as partners, or to what degree we should see them as partners. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been thinking a lot about the and this is some great work. Oh, hello. So this is the work that we've been doing at UCD, and it's been led by Phil Doyle, and it's looking at this idea of when we're in dialogue with any kind of sort of agent, we're kind of making, we're kind of in a dialogue with them, we're kind of they're a communication partner with us at the time, and we almost try and build a kind of representation of what's going on within the dialogue and the interaction, as well as what the system can do and understand, like we do with all partners when we're interacting in dialogue. So we do it in human-human dialogue, and we do it relatively efficiently. So we use, it might be stereotypical cues, might be kind of accent, or it might be some elements of that, or maybe that, communication of particular, that kind of job that we have. And we make all these assumptions about people when we're interacting. About their knowledge state, about their ability to communicate with us on particular topics, and about on what they might say. And then therefore our common ground, so our shared representations of the state and issues, but also just the knowledge that we share together. And so we've been doing some work about, well, what does that mean when you do that with interactions with systems? So it transpires that we do this with systems, but we assume that when we build a model of our partner in this interaction with an agent, with a speech agent, for instance, we think of them as kind of at-risk listeners or at-risk partners. They're not as flexible, or they're not as competent as human-based partners. But that's what the literature has shown over the past, like I said, 20 years, I think. But the work that we've been doing has highlighted that's actually multifaceted. There are a number of different dimensions we consider whenever we're thinking about a machine as a partner, as a dialogue partner in particular. So one of them is about kind of knowledge and competence. So what kind of knowledge it has, how competent is it as a dialogue. The second one being that how human-like actually is it? So how much can we use this human-like element as an anchor, and how appropriate is that? And the third thing, third dimension of that being an element of flexibility. How flexible is the system in terms of its responses and in terms of its ability to as a dialogue partner? And so that was part of our research we published at CHI last year. And so we've identified that these partner models that we create, so like mental models of what dialogue partners can do and understand, they're actually multifaceted. And there's a question there about, does that actually lead us to say different things to systems based on those? And we're doing a lot of work on that at the moment. So the perceptual element is multidimensional, but does it actually lead to kind of linguistic effects? Does it lead us to say particular things? Does it lead us to say, use particular language? And if that's the case, we could potentially use that as a marker of whether people's models are being matched or mismatched, like Lieber and Selin kind of say in their paper. So we've been looking at that as a kind of that as a paradigm of the interaction, that you're basically trying to kind of collaborate through dialogue with a partner in this type of interaction. So we're quite excited about that kind of element. It marries lots of concepts in psycholinguistics to the work that we see in speech interfaces over the years. So it's really kind of like a bringing together of a number of theoretical concepts across the fields.
Very nice. Now I'll put the link in the chat to that work. So that was at CHI recently. Anna, yeah. I think there are already some questions in the chats.
Yeah, and Shedan, did you want to go first with your question?
Yes, thank you. I think maybe it's partly answered, but I will dare to ask it again. Sure. So I was thinking that when you have proactive agents or proactive conversational agent, let's say, I think the whole character of this proactivity and interference with daily practices can change our perception towards this conversational agent from a tool that is programmed to an alterity or a counterpart. But the threshold is not yet well defined, as far as I know. And I was wondering, what are the factors that actually influence this threshold of tool versus counterpart?
Oh, I lost the last bit there. But so what was the last bit there? So you said before.
So I was wondering that what are the factors that possibly could define this threshold from a tool to the shift from a tool to a counterpart?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think that so there's a lot of functionality limitation actually at the moment with speech systems. It means that even if we got all of the elements of design cues right, so if we got like the being able to cue a sociable agent that can sounds like it's got a happy voice, or that it can express humor, or it can express some elements of elements like this. The functional elements of the systems are still mostly based around this idea of executing a task. So when it comes to this idea of kind of proactive interaction, I think the systems are still very, very limited in terms of what they can do and understand. So I think that there's definitely a sort of a technological catch up in terms of trying to build systems that are flexible enough to firstly recognize that you need help if they're going to be proactive. Secondly, recognize that you need help and they're not going to be annoying, because that's another we don't want to invent a voice-based clippy, and then the other element of kind of going, well, is this actually going to be beneficial for the users, with the idea of, does it fit with their task that they're wanting to conduct? And so there's a sense of trying to understand all of those sorts of dimensions to be able to make sure that we can actually get that design ready for when the tech can deal with more complex interactions. And I think that the way that we get the tech to deal with more complex interactions actually might not be machine learning oriented either. It might be more about understanding and I would say this, the dialogue structures, the way that conversation is built in those contexts to be able for a system to be able to fit in within that. But there's also a question of whether a system will ever truly be able to be seen like a kind of a proactive, like a kind of a friend helping you out. Like, I mean, it's going to be very different. It will still be very different in the way that it's perceived, because again, users aren't dumb. They know this is an automated system that's helping them. So So we need to keep that in mind as well. The nature of the partner there is going to be very different. But if we understand elements of the dialogue that's going on, understand that people will be aware that the partner is different, as well as understand aspects of the task and get the functionality correct, I think we can get there. But that's a lot of things, and that's a lot of things to do. But I hope that answers the question, by the way.
Yes, a lot of things to think about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Sandy, I think your question might be a good follow-up. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think to have systems better understand what it is, in terms of being proactive and stuff, and understand what we might be trying to do. Obviously, they're going to have to understand us better. I guess my question is, well, I mean, these things are already creepy enough. So, the idea that we should invite them to learn even more about us so that they can serve us better is slightly concerning. So what do we do about that? How do we build these systems so they can have more knowledge without the creepy side of things, or is that just not possible?
Yeah, so that is a big question as well. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks for dropping the grenade in. So it's a tricky balance with voice-based interfaces at present, because I mean, you're right. I mean, there's, I'm not meaning to sound scaremongering, but to some extent, sometimes there's a hot mic in every home. If you're wanting to learn more about the user in terms of that situation, then you may have to kind of like have opt-ins for that if people want to do those things. But it also may be like, there may be some aspects of that you don't necessarily need to record huge amounts of personal information to be able to do that. So it may be on a task specific basis that could be done, kind of, I don't know, monitoring, like, say, for instance, the state of a task that you're conducting at that particular moment in time. It doesn't necessarily, you could opt out to the calendar side of things, but you could opt into, well, when I'm doing a document here, I'd like them to be able to give me some suggestions about whether I can incorporate another paper from this area, from this area here. So I think it would be task dependent, but I mean, for sure, these things need to up their game a bit in terms of how we get people to opt into the way these systems kind of learn about our dialogue and learn how we speak and learn on kind of how they personalize. And there's a lot of work in the Adapt Center that's focusing on that at the moment, but that's just getting started, about the idea of, well, what does a voice interface with privacy and ethics built in and by design look like? And actually, the Irish government have taken an initiative on this. They had an Oroptus committee recently talking exactly about this, and I think the conclusion was like, well, basically, this is going to be really tricky, but it has to be a priority. But the ideas are still it's really open in terms of how you do that. But it's a really tricky issue, because most of the time these things are built on learning from what we give them in terms of voice. So we'd have to find ways of how that opt-out might work. And I don't have the answer to that, but it's a very, very interesting question, and it's one that I think that a lot of voice companies need to wrestle with at the moment. Probably didn't answer your question there. I don't have any solutions to that, Sandy, because it's a major, major problem.
I don't think it's answerable. I think that's just being awkward.
Oh, is it getting hot in here? Sorry, it's something. This is an excellent question, though, and it's one that hopefully in a few years we'll have a bit more information on, because that's what we're starting to look at in a bit more detail.
Okay, there is still a couple more questions in the chat, but I think we might come back to those after we've finished the recording. So I'll just hand back to Chris at this point.
Thanks, Anna. I'm wondering whether sometimes we're expecting too much of these intelligent agents, because the human intelligent agents I interact with sometimes, family and friends, tend to forget some things that I say occasionally, even though I think that's now shared knowledge. So maybe it's good if these agents, they just forget something, and that makes them actually realistic. But Ben, I do have a more serious closing question, because I'm wondering what sort of, there's lots of things still to do to improve those conversational user interfaces, but I'm wondering, what's one thought or one dream or ambition for sort of the years to come that you think CUI will need to change, or that will actually change? Now that, I guess, because there's sort of a growing community, that's a good thing that there's more interaction and more momentum of that field. So what will change in the next 5 years, and maybe particularly related to work or the future of work?
So yeah, so I think, I mean, what we're seeing a lot of kind of growth in the community is the voice going into different domains. So it going very much into kind of healthcare and well-being domains. There's some really interesting work over in the past few years about how we can use voice systems to help with momentary self-assessment of mood, or a self-assessment of those kind of aspects in mental health applications. And that's the kind of thing where these voice agents and systems are really well designed for, because they have that element of not being a human. So there's hopefully more honesty in terms of reporting, but also if you can get voice to do that, it's also replicating the type of way that assessment would be gathered initially, or the type of treatment that would be required there. So there's some movements towards it being moved in different domains, also being moved into automated vehicles, but also how this may operate in vehicles. And so you and I have talked about this before, and about where the voice might fit in terms of how it delivers warnings, notifications, particular content. As well as, actually, one of the things that we're seeing in the community as well is this role of, and the thing that makes me really excited is this idea about trying to understand what we're doing as users with these systems. So, I mean, that's one of the things that over the next 5 years, I think is something that was given much less attention. So even if you go back to sort of 2010, 2015, you'd be looking at, you'd be digging around in the CHI proceedings for something speech oriented. Whereas now, there's you can't move speech some of the time in terms of CHI-based stuff, but also in terms of CUI community. There's a real growth at trying to understand what does it mean to be a user interacting with a speech system in general. And so understanding the linguistic choices, understanding why people behave the way they do, and then understanding, importantly, how when you're designing those systems, that's going to influence that's going to influence how you're interacting with those systems. And that sounds like kind of a pretty basic stuff when it comes to other interfaces, but really we need some foundational elements, some foundational theories that are going to be used within that, and they are non-existent at present when it comes to CUI-based interaction work. And we're trying to work a bit on that. And I think in about, say, 5-10 years, we'll have a really good theoretical grounding of why we behave the way we do with interaction. And then that opens up a whole load of possibilities when it comes to things like, potentially modeling user behaviors, or modeling and understanding the interaction more deeply, but also then having agents that can predict what people may do in certain situations based on, linguistically or behaviorally based on certain things. And so I say I kind of see that's where some of the growth is. There's also a really big growth in identifying how do we design more effectively with these systems. So what kind of methods and tools that we have. So we've just recently had some work looking at heuristics, but there seems to be a lot of growth about how we get these systems to be much better designed for users, using heuristics and using kind of maybe more industry-wide tools that lead us to be good conversational UX designers. And so we're seeing that an awful lot. And I think in the next kind of 5-10 years, we'll see a lot more formalizing of those methods, of those ways, and then the kind of proliferating in industry and proliferating as we go through there. So there's kind of three things. It's kind of like opening into different domains, much wider domains, a theoretical foundation that's required, and then a design element there that's really, really needing to be understood, I think, is growing from the community. So that's where I see the growth being in those three areas.
That sounds great. Looking forward to read more about those theories and design methods and how they go into every conference. I guess AudioUI already had its CUI at AudioUI session. I guess every other conference will have a CUI at your favorite conference.
Right. We get everywhere.
If your conference doesn't have a CUI at yet, then make sure to talk to Ben and Justin and some of the other people here in the room. They will make it happen.
We will make it
more than
happen.
enough to share.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Exactly. We're a very open community. So, you know.
I know. Thanks,
Yeah.
Ben, for the conversation this week. We're going to continue after the recording is finished. Before we do that, just want to mention that you can find us on Twitter. I'm not a Twitter person myself. I think this is a KaiWorkSimp is our Twitter handle. Otherwise, #KaiWork, you will find us. The link will be added to the chat. And then next week, at the same time, I hope to see all of you again. And I'll be talking to Sarah Fox from Carnegie Mellon University about worker-centered design and what the challenges are over there. If you want to receive more notifications, make sure to go to our website. You can sign up to receive weekly email reminders and calendar invites. So a lot of this stuff automatically enters your calendar, and maybe in 2 years there will be a CUI assistant that will also tell you,
That's right.
go to the call now. There's cool stuff going on.
Yeah, exactly. There's a KaiWork symposium waiting for you. That's what. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Ben. We'll continue after the recording is finished.
That's all right. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.